Ms. Solomon, hello. Let me see if I can get your audio up. There we go.
Hi. Yeah, it
Hello,
was
I'm
actually
Peter.
up and then
Thank
I
you so
muted it by
much.
mistake. How are you doing?
We're surviving somehow.
Yeah.
It has not been easy, but we're doing it somehow. Yeah.
Are people coming into your store or you're not doing that?
Yeah. No, they're coming in. I mean,
Yeah.
everyone's got to wear a mask, and we keep it. It's one way in, one way out.
Right.
So it
Yeah.
works, but
Right.
it's been strange. Yeah, obviously.
hmm Yeah. No, it's been strange everywhere.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'm glad to be doing this, even if
Well,
it's
we're
in the
thrilled.
ether.
And
Yeah.
congratulations for the New York Times piece.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's great.
that was kind of exciting.
Yeah,
So.
it's picking up. I mean, and we can see it actually at the store. I mean, it's like, the sales are starting to pick up along with all that
Oh,
stuff.
really?
So
Oh, good.
it's gearing up. So
Good.
yeah.
Good. Yeah, wait, where, what part of the city lights in? So I went to Berkeley for grad school. So, and I spent a lot of time in San Francisco, but for some reason, I don't remember where it is, like in
Yeah,
the
so it
city.
is kind of weird. I mean, it's in the upper northeastern quadrant of the city.
Okay.
So, but it's not really on the shoreline. It's just kind of up the hill from the shoreline.
Yeah.
So, but it's not quite downtown, but it's not quite to the north. It's sort of a
Right.
little more inland. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. How long have you been there?
Long enough to know better. I am coming on my 30th year.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I was originally a videographer and a filmmaker, and books were supposed to be a part-time thing. And
Right.
then City Lights,
Right.
well, I caught the bug.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, it's like there were many other bookstores that if you'd worked at them, you probably would have gone on your way, but
Yeah.
it's like an institution.
Yeah,
So
I mean, it's been the best gig I've ever had. I mean, and the people you meet, the freedom to develop programs,
yeah,
it just wouldn't exist anywhere else.
yeah.
And it was Ferlinghetti that, he walked up to me one day and he said, we don't have a calendar. He says, I know you produce events and you've done things in the past because you want to do something. And that was it. That was the hook,
Right.
and from then on, it was just,
Yeah.
so
Wow.
very lucky, very lucky.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what are been, have you, do you introduce all the events?
Yeah, well, not all of them. I've got a couple of colleagues that, kind of we divvy it up. And, I'm just trying to get some younger people into it now.
Yeah.
I've been here doing this long enough. It's time to get some, some folks that are, because at some point I'm going to have to pass it on. So, yeah, it's 3 people. And for virtual, it kind of has to be because, virtual is 5 times the work of live.
Right.
Right.
And also, I mean, from what I understand, I'm friends with the writer Danielle Evans, and our book came out last fall. And the thing is, everybody knew last fall that everything was going to be virtual. So then they just booked her like 5 nights, because she didn't have to go anywhere. So that, whereas, this book, when it, they were sort of making plans for it, nobody really knew. So then it kind of slowly, and to be honest, I did a thing last night and I'm doing a thing tonight, but I can't imagine if I was doing like more than 2 things in a week. It's a lot.
Oh, it's crazy. You can't.
Yeah.
You'll destroy yourself. I mean, it's got to be spaced out, and it's just, I mean, it's saner that way. But then it's also, you want to build momentum. I mean, it's like you want to tease people a little bit. I mean, it's playing with anticipation and stuff like that. If you burn people out, I mean, there's a kind of a method to cultivating. I mean, I produced a book a few years back, and it was an anthology, and and I must have toured with it for 1.5 years, which is crazy. It became a reading series. But it's like I calculated that I did not do more than 1 event every 3 weeks, and it was just and it was different every time. And then one day it was at the Rare Book Room at UCSF. And then, then it was like, at another bookstore, it was Stacy's, then it was at a nightclub, I mean, it was just kind of mixing it all up so that, it just kept it interesting.
Well, yeah, I mean, the last time I didn't actually have much of anything planned originally. And then I was on Fresh Air, and then a million people called me. And like, sort of by the end of 18 months, I was like, oh, this is why, like, singers try to do their new work. Like, hi, Angela.
Let me see if I can get Angela's audio up. It's not working. Can you hear us, Angela? You can hear us. Okay. Well, we can't see you.
Wait, are you muted? Did you unmute?
And she should be unmuted. Yeah. Okay, here we go. Let's try it now.
Because it's Brian.
It wasn't allowing me to unmute before.
Oh, there you go.
Okay, you're fine.
Hi.
Yeah, there you go.
Hello.
Oh my God, we're matching. All of us.
I actually had a shirt with a collar like that on earlier, but I thought that it was going to be too hot, so I switched to this shirt.
Yeah, no, that's funny. Yeah, it's funny also because I had to do this video thing, and I was like, you're really supposed to wear a color, but who has a color? I mean, I don't like, who has a shirt that's like a bright color that's like flattering? Like, because also it was like, you can't wear something that strobes. So I had gotten something in a pattern, which I didn't normally do, but I was like, oh, but then it was like, no, because it'll strobe. So it's like, okay, so I'm just gonna wear black every night on Zoom. So.
Yeah, I just ignore the pattern thing because I see people on camera all the time in patterns, and it seems fine to me.
It doesn't like give you a seizure or anything. Like,
no, maybe I am being ableist though, because
maybe.
I fine about it.
Yeah. So yeah. Anyway, we were just talking about how like going out on tour makes you so tired of reading the same thing over and over again. I mean, I'm not, whatever, but I was thinking about the last book, like how I wound up doing so many events, and at the end of it, I was like, oh my God, if I have to do that one more time. No, which are great problems to have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But one does get tired of reading the same thing. It's true. Yeah. So just a disclaimer, my husband is going to take the baby somewhere. But
we might hear the baby.
Huh?
The baby might make a cameo.
Yes. So the issue is the room that you wouldn't be able to hear her in is also the room with the worst internet. And I got like an extender just to be able to like teach class back there, but it's still not reliable enough for like a live event. Okay. So she's just like on the other side of this wall. So my husband's trying to take her somewhere, but the problem is that bedtime is like in an hour. So she's inevitably got to come back, and she just screams. So that's how she talks.
Well, this seems like such a mild problem compared to, say, Nate Mackey, who we hosted a while ago, and his son was playing video games in the next room, and it was destroying the bandwidth. And so he was like, let me see if I can get him to stop playing. And he wouldn't stop playing. You could hear their voices rising in the next room. And I was like, oh no, oh no.
Oh my gosh.
And he came back and he's like, okay, I think he's gonna leave the house now.
That's early in the pandemic, before I understood like what Zoom required. My husband was on like a work Zoom, actually trying to get a new job. And I was so anxious because it's like, I've never heard my husband do an interview for like a job before, that I was like just going through all these YouTube videos, and I didn't realize that I was actually ruining his interview with my like anxious YouTube watching. He got a job. He didn't get that one. That one actually did not end up being the one he wanted, but he did get a job. So it ended well, but there was a moment where I was like, oh, okay, so this is how he's going to stay unemployed because of my anxiety.
Because of the Zoom. Yeah, no, I mean, my kids, like, they're being trained now to be quiet during this. But if I had been in the game as long as Nate Mackey, I imagine they wouldn't care. He was like, you can Zoom every night, but we're going to have to play video games. So there's that. But yeah, I mean, I live in Philadelphia, and I live in a house, and I just can't imagine if do you live in an apartment or a house, Angela?
I live in a condo, which is an apartment, but people in LA really care about the difference. I don't.
Yeah, all right.
And luckily though, we only share one wall. And it's actually the quietest wall. It's like that back room. So we only share one wall with anyone because we're like in the corner.
Yeah.
And we're on the top floor, but I feel bad for the people underneath us because my baby's walking now and she's got a heavy footfall for like somebody who's 21 pounds.
Yeah, right. Oh, wait. How old is she?
She's going to be 13 months next week.
Oh, wow. So one.
Well, I would send her a City Lights onesie, but I think she might have outgrown it.
Oh, she's a very long baby, so she probably did.
What's her name?
Zinzi.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Not named after Zinzi.
Yeah, but
spelled after Zinzi, so with no D. And I think Zinzi is the only person I know who doesn't have a D in that name.
A D?
A lot of times it's Zindzi.
Oh,
like Zinzi Mandela, Nelson Mandela's daughter, is Zindzi. Which is the first time I heard the name, and I really liked the name, but I didn't want the D. So I asked Zinzi Clemens, how does she feel about her name? She felt good about it. So she supported me taking her spelling, so I did.
Okay. So I emailed with Angela earlier and said that I was probably going to read for a little while at the top of
Excellent.
So
thank you.
So you're going to introduce us and then
So we'll start around 5 after.
Okay.
People always kind of straggle in.
Even though they're straggling into their living room.
Yeah. And then what I do this thing where I just sort of like, after I've introduced you, I'm just going to like disappear.
Right.
And then I will reappear at the end for the Q&A. If you want me to field questions, I leave it to you, or if you even want a Q&A. I mean, think about it and tell me what you think, because it can go either way. Usually these things last about 45 minutes to an hour, and then Q&A lasts another 15, something like that. So I think an hour to an hour and a quarter is kind of roughly the time we have to work with. So yeah, my intro will be about 3 minutes long. Then I'll be posting stuff and making sure people kind of, are cool in the chat and stuff. And yeah.
Oh, we're gonna have chat on.
So yeah, that's how I'm selling books. We don't have like a kind of a glorified sort of point of sale button or call to action button. So we post it in the chat, and that's how we kind of sell both your books.
Okay, cool. Yeah, no, I mean, it sounds good. I'm fine with Q&A. Do you want to moderate Q&A, or Angela, or do you want, you're Peter, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Or should Peter moderate Q&A? What do you think? And 15 minutes is about right, I think.
I find that on Zoom, I can't really hide my face when I don't like a question as I'm like scrolling through them. So maybe I should not moderate the Q&A. My face gives it away. I'm like, oh no, not that one.
Okay.
Okay, good. So then I'll pluck a few questions out of there and field the more interesting ones.
Yeah, no, there was something else I was going to say. Yeah, a funny thing is like also that people wait until the event is going to end in 2 minutes before they like to jam questions in the chat, which is kind of a funny thing. So yeah, last night I had to be like, I think it's over. The event. I think this is over.
What works sometimes is if you read another short excerpt, because it'll also leave them with a taste of the book. And then also, when we come back, by then they'll be like, oh, okay, I better, just a thought, maybe if you feel like it.
Okay. Yeah, so have you been doing a lot of these this fall?
We do about 2 to 3 a week, and then sometimes I'll skip a week. And then we've done some larger scale, almost like symposium-like gigs that are, sort of weekend things. And then, I think we're going to end it around the 15th of December, and then take about a month, and then start back up again in the middle of January.
Do you think in the winter you might go back, or when do you think you might go back to having events in the store?
We're not planning on anything until probably summer.
Yeah.
Of 22.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It'll be like at least summer. I mean, it just keeps going up and down. I mean, as long as you've got like governors and discouraging people from wearing masks and are not into vaccines, and it's just, we're fine. But then, people are visiting from elsewhere, and it's just like everywhere else in the world. It just goes up and down, So I don't know. It's
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's also funny because I live in Philadelphia, and Philadelphia, high vaccination rate, we have to wear masks, whatever. But if you go just outside the city, I mean, people generally do, but the signs are more like, we would encourage you. Whereas in the city, they're like, if you want to come in here, like, this kind of thing. So
yeah, we did that. Like, we had 2 events this week that were live that were part of Litquake. They weren't really something we initiated. And one was an experiment. It was in a hotel. The room had a high ceiling. It was well ventilated. The staff were incredibly professional and kind of made sure everyone was wearing a mask, checked the vaccination rolls, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. But even then, I was so nervous. I was just like sweating. I was like, I cannot wait to get out of here. And it was a great event, and we sold a bunch of books, but it was still like, shit, it's like, I don't know. It's just, there's people visiting from other places. I could tell, like, oh, I'm from, Minnesota and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh God, I don't want to hear this. I don't want to deal.
I'll start looking up the vax rates in Minnesota.
Yes.
Yeah, no.
My wife works in healthcare, so it's kind of, it's both a great thing and a really bad thing, because she's also like, just has got the latest on what the numbers are. And so
she works in San Francisco in healthcare.
So she works for Physicians for Social Responsibility.
Okay.
She's like,
so like national and international numbers.
So it's, they have like offices in every major city. And so she's the San Francisco chapter communications person. So yeah. So it's a curse and a blessing.
Right. Yeah, I can imagine.
Let's see. So I'm going to give you your 5-minute warning now.
Okay.
Already got a bunch of people in, and probably get a bunch more. But it's looking good. It's about what it should be. So
I've never done this where it's like we're in a different Zoom than everyone else. Like, I can't see.
So yeah, we're in the green room, and they're on the outside, and what they see is essentially a screen that says host is waiting to let you in. And come, starting time, I let them in, and then they'll see this picture. They'll see essentially whoever is speaking. I could also spotlight each of you and then have you both up on the screen. I kind of think it's nicer just to have like each person talking, and it cuts like it's a film. There seems to be more continuity that way. It's a kind of weird to have like people just, unless it's like a panel of like 3 people or something, then I generally do that. But it seems to work pretty well in terms of cutting from person to person, and it's like voice activated, so it works. Because we're going to record this also and try to post it on YouTube afterwards.
Okay.
Just so that we can kind of, it really helps with sales. It's kind of crazy. Sometimes we sell more books through posting it than we do actually during the event itself.
Yeah, that makes sense, because people are just looking at their leisure.
Yeah, it's interesting.
No, it's not.
So
like everything else, it's a stream. Then it's a streaming thing.
Yeah.
Oh.
All right. So how many dates do you actually have set up?
Like 5 or 6.
Oh, that's not very much at all. Oh wow.
It was basically October.
That's totally sane.
Yeah, and then no, it's still the same. So, and then we'll see. I mean, I think there's some other stuff coming up, but I don't know. It's not quite hammered out yet.
Cool.
So, but it's funny that there's one in like the 3 time zones. Like everybody, there's like.
We like that actually. I prefer it that way. I hate when it's all on the West Coast. Like there'll be authors that are from here, and then they'll do one in San Francisco, one in LA, one in San Diego, and then I'm screwed. We'll get 5 people in the audience.
Oh, right.
But if it's if it's Seattle, San Francisco, Chicago, New York, that's great. That I will get a full house.
Yeah. So, and it's funny because I know some people here who did the last night, and then some people here are doing tonight. It's like, the dinner crowd and then the wine crowd. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Is this your first book that Jenna has edited?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I've had a lot of editors at FSG. So like a lot of like turnover and stuff. So, and I really, I mean, the first book, you know, the editor was there when it came out, but Disgruntled, like, I think there were like two different, I mean, there were like 3 editors or something over the course of the book. So,
Wow.
yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't know if it's publishing or if it's them. You know, I'm not totally sure because I just don't know.
The fur was flying there, you know,
Yeah.
like 3 years ago. So,
Right.
you know, I don't see that at Knopf. I mean, you know,
Right.
before Sonny died, you know, it was the same faces for like 10 years, you
Right.
know.
Yeah.
So I think it's more, it's definitely like Macmillan. It's not even, I'm not sure how much of it is FSG.
It's more like a parent
Macmillan.
company or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, it's because it can get a little repressive from what I've heard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
Meanwhile, my book's publishers doesn't exist anymore. HMH is just like done. Well, they are part of a Harper now.
Got swallowed up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The most awkward of things, like the woman who still does like whatever random PR request for my book, she emailed me a question like in the morning, and in the afternoon she was like, I'm not the right person to respond to this question because I just got laid off. And I was like, but you emailed me the question. I felt so terrible for her. You know, I've just met her once because like HMH people were all in Boston, all their like PR people, but I felt so bad for her because she was going to get another job like that in Boston.
Yeah.
Do something else.
Well, what's really funny is I'll tell you one person who's been at FSG since the beginning is the lady who works the front desk. Like, so I've been publishing with them since like 2006. The same lady, like the West Indian lady, she's rather brusque. She's been there the whole time. So
she's the one that probably keeps the building
exactly.
She runs things.
You know, she's like, yeah, let that fur fly, whatever. This is my job.
I love it.
But yeah, so
well, it is a great honor to have you both here. Thank you so much, Angela, for doing this.
Yeah,
and
thanks a lot, Angela.
Asali,
my pleasure.
Congratulations. And the only thing I regret is, you know, it's customary for me to take people out for dinner and drinks after something like this.
I know, this is so sad not to go out for dinner in San Francisco.
It just so sucks. There's one part of my life where, you know, I'm not at the store right now. I'm actually in a basement near the beach.
Oh, really?
I had to create a studio.
What a good background.
Oh, this is all smoke and mirrors. It's like Wizard of Oz, right? I mean, I just do that just because it's a nice background. I've got a shoji panel that I'm sick of. So if I just put up the books, when I go in once a week to pick up my mail, I photograph one of the cases. And so it's fresh, actually. What you see is a day or 2 old, right? But yeah, I miss that. I miss the, you know, meeting editors, you know, meeting authors, you know, going out, you know, sharing with people. It's it's like being in exile.
Well, my husband was like, just pretend you're on tour. The kids do not care about that. I'm on tour. Like I can't get that for you right now. It's like, just pretend. Mommy's not here.
Well, we got a full house, so I'm gonna start letting them in. This will be our 1-minute warning. So have fun with it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll be in the back room watching. Here we go. Hello, everybody. Peter Maravellis here. I hope this finds you all safe and well. I'd like to welcome you to City Lights Live, the virtual reading series that follows in the footsteps of our in-store calendar during the time of the pandemic. We are beaming to you from the unceded ancestral grounds of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples. For more, we continue to celebrate the works of authors we know and love with readings, discussions, and forums moving into the fall season and beyond, and hopefully towards a COVID-free era. Tonight, we are celebrating the much anticipated new novel from the award-winning author Asali Solomon. It's titled The Days of Afrekete, and it is published by our friends at Farrar Straus Giroux. LitHub and the Millions have designated it the most anticipated book of 2021. The Washington Post, Time, Philadelphia Inquirer, even Ms. Magazine have all granted it kind of the best book of October status. And the book also just got a really nice write-up in the New York Times. And these honors are well-deserved as Ms. Solomon's prose shines. We're very, very fond of her work here at City Lights. So Asali Solomon's first novel, Disgruntled, was a best book of the year at the San Francisco Chronicle and the Denver Post. Her book, Get Down, earned a Rona Jaffe Foundation's Writers Award and the National Book Foundation's 5 Under 35 honor, and was a finalist for the Hurston Wright Legacy Award. Her work has appeared in O Magazine, the Oprah Magazine, Vibe, Essence, the Paris Review, and McSweeney's, as well as several anthologies. She's also appeared on NPR. Ms. Solomon teaches fiction writing and literature of the African diaspora at Haverford College. Born and raised in Philadelphia, she makes her home there with her husband and 2 sons. Joining her tonight in conversation, we are delighted to have Angela Flournoy in the house. Angela Flournoy is the author of The Turner House, which was a finalist for the National Book Award and a New York Times Notable Book of the Year. The novel won the VCU Cabell First Novel Prize and was also a finalist for the Center for Fiction First Novel Prize and an NAACP Image Award. Her nonfiction has appeared in many publications, including the New York Times, The Nation, the Los Angeles Times, and the New Yorker. She has received numerous honors for her work, including fellowships from the New York Public Library, Cullman Center for Writers and Scholars, the National Endowment of the Arts, the American Academy in Berlin as well. She is a faculty member in the Low Residency MFA program at Warren Wilson College. So now, please join us in giving a warm welcome to our guests. Asali Solomon, Angela Flournoy, welcome to City Lights Live.
Thank you for joining us. I have to say, I have not really done one of these recently where I could actually see who was there. And it actually is making me more nervous than I thought. But anyway, I'm really happy that City Lights invited me, and I'm very happy that Angela is going to join me in conversation. And I'm going to start with a reading about 5 to 10. It goes between 5 and 10 minutes. So and then we will have our conversation. So the novel is The Days of Afrekete, and one of the main characters is Lizelle. And she once was a lesbian and now is in this scene marrying a white lawyer named Wynn. And I think there's not so much you need to know to listen to this passage. One of the names that come up that is kind of out of context is Selena. And Selena is a woman with whom Lizelle had a relationship several years ago in college. So yeah, so this is the scene of Lizelle and Wynn's wedding. The ceremony at a local Episcopal church had gone well. Though there had been some uncomfortable spaces between his words, the minister, as old and white as a ghost, hadn't said anything too off-putting. Lizelle's mother, Verity, who was aggressively friendly with Wynn and his family, hadn't frowned, and the unity candle hadn't set the altar afire. In the aftermath, wife sighed with relief and leaned against husband, but found that his body felt rigid and unwelcoming. She pulled away to look at him. "What's up?" "Lizelle," said Wynn in a thick voice, "did we just do something terrible? I mean, did you really want to do this?" Lizelle hugged her bare arms, suddenly cold. She felt the complicated underthings from the wedding store cutting into her torso. "What are you asking me? Did you?" "Well, I'm the one who proposed. In fact, I proposed everything from the beginning. I'm asking what you wanted." "Wynn," she said, panicking, a shadow in the corners of her eyes threatening to blot out her vision. "I did what I wanted. What the hell?" She could see the photographer approaching, Wynn's mother at his side looking worried as always. They were going to take photos with Wynn's rich racist grandma, who unfailingly called Lizelle Lisa, and became irritable when corrected. The other grandma, racist and not rich, had stayed in Fresno. Well, we can take these expensive pictures as a souvenir, said Lizelle, feeling the spirit of Verity in her, and then we can hammer out the divorce. You know that's not what I meant, Wynne said. I'm never divorcing you. Isn't it a little early to be renewing our vows? That's funny. Yeah, that's a good one, Wynne said solemnly. In a rough motion, Lizelle took Wynne's arm to make a formal entrance into the hall. She knew he was not seriously reconsidering their marriage, but the conversation gave her the beginnings of a headache. Thinking of the evening as their last date, Lizelle was at turns mechanical and reckless. A smile that did not reach her eyes for photos, gratitude and platitudes offered at all the tables they visited. A stiff first dance to Heroes by David Bowie, which Wynne thought would be cool. Of course, it sounded insane and desperate, because the song was meant to sound insane and desperate, no matter how the young wedding singer tried to sweeten it. Nihilism flooding her body, Lizelle drank champagne and played with Wynne Cousins Daisy's beautiful hair. Then the DJ finally took over, put on Marvin Gaye, and she invited Mr. Charles, Verity's date, to dance. Her mother glared from the sidelines. Lizelle knew full well that Come Get to This was one of her mother's favorite songs. Mr. Charles was effusive. I think this might be the best wedding I've ever been to beside the one where my buddy Robert Bell played. Thank you, Mr. Charles. Lizelle had heard him speak of that wedding many times, and despite her general distaste for him, she could not help feeling honored that hers was in a league with it. You know Robert Bell from Kool and the Gang? You look just like a princess, Mr. Charles was saying. I told your mother you'd find your way. I've been telling her. And don't let anybody say anything to you about the interracial fact, because if you catch a hold of something good, you can't let go. These men out here ain't shit, he said, reminding Lizelle of something Verity often said of Mr. Charles. Excuse me, Mr. Charles, Lizelle said, and headed into the mercifully empty bathroom. She tried to negotiate the full skirt of her ridiculous lace gown. She'd essentially let Verity pick it out, to get herself onto a toilet in a cramped stall. She wondered how many women brewed up wedding day yeast infections in sweat-soaked underwear as she struggled to peel off the $50 slip of cotton. She threw it in the little box meant for menstrual trash and left the stall. In the bathroom mirror, she saw her dreadlocked updo in the first stages of collapse. It was obvious that her and Wynne being together was crazy. But he had kept upping the ante, moving quickly to get out ahead of second thoughts and boredom, and she kept accepting the challenge. Their alliance was a conspiracy against the various imprisoning realities they'd known. She began taking out hairpins and throwing them onto the floor. The last time she littered, she'd been 6 and Verity had grabbed her by the neck. Selena materialized next to her in the mirror and stood looking mutely at Lizelle. She did that sometimes. But it was only 4 months. They'd been together so long ago. Why are you still here? Lizelle jumped when the bathroom door whipped open. I see there's a whole other party going on in here, said Jennifer, Wynne's sister. She had given a toast earlier, claiming that Wynne was the glue bonding the Anderson family, and that Lizelle was the glue that held Wynne together. The speech had almost made her cry, especially since she knew she had to leave him. Yeah, Lizelle said, feeling nervous. There's a lot going on here. She gestured toward her hair and dress. I mean, this is not really my usual situation. Jennifer laughed and addressed Lizelle in the mirror. I don't think this is anyone's usual situation. I've never understood bride drag. White means death in so many cultures. But, she said with a little smile, you look amazing. You should always wear white at your weddings. Jennifer wasn't quite pretty with her sharp ferret's face and her large eyebrows, and yet her silky blue slip dress made everyone else look like a fat frump or a sad cake. And there was something, one can't even see how she could pull off the ridiculous name Jandy. Lizelle wanted to sleep with her, and Lizelle knew that Jennifer wanted her to want to sleep with her, which was irritating. Not then nor ever did she figure out how Wynne's parents, with their unpolished, uptight white Northeasterner routine, had given birth to such little operators. Later, Jennifer, Lizelle said, escaping the bathroom. Lizelle, Jennifer murmured. After 10 o'clock, as the party neared its end, Lizelle approached the DJ and made a request that had not been on the lengthy email she'd sent him. Then she pulled Wynn out of his seat where he was huddled with some one-syllable guys from the firm, Biff and Gim or whatever. Our last dance, she said, as the opening moans of Forever My Lady filled the room. Our last dance ever. She had not meant to say this. She'd been writing a letter in her head that she planned to leave in the honeymoon suite before slipping away. You know, I didn't mean what I said, babe. I was just nervous. She spoke sternly. Wynn, it's traditional to be nervous before the wedding, but not okay to ruin the reception. Sorry, I know I spazzed back there. Look, he said, taking her by the hands and looking into her eyes. I'll make it up to you with the life we're gonna have. I'm so fucking happy right now. He smelled like pure alcohol. She herself was largely composed of champagne at this point. Together, they were flammable. Thank you.
Well, I'll clap. That was wonderful. Thank you. There are sirens, I think. Sorry if you hear them. I really, really, really like this book, like a lot. So I'm very excited to talk to you about it today. I have a lot of questions, but I wanted to start with just broadly, how did this book come to be?
Sorry, I was like, I'm muted. It's funny, I'm muted because I thought the sirens were here and then I had to unmute.
They're my
So, I mean, this book came to be in a lot of different ways, but one of the ways it came to be that's hard to sort of explain in any like interesting way is just, I had this image of a woman in a fancy kitchen talking to her mother, and her mother essentially telling her that this is whatever this is thing that's happening is not going to work, right? And so that was one of the first things that came to me. And I guess before that, I had a sense, and I wasn't really sure why, that I wanted to write a novel that was structured in the way that Mrs. Dalloway was structured. And so when I had that sense, and then sort of the first image of the actual thing that came to me was this. And then a bunch of other elements sort of started coming together. And one of them was like, so they're not a fascinating couple, but you may know that the mayor of New York, Bill de Blasio, and his wife, Shirley MacRae, right? So I remember reading this article about them, and it was like, she was a Black lesbian poet. And I was like, and then she was married to Bill de Blasio. And I thought that was like a really weird story. And I was like, I wonder what's up with that? So that was another thing as well. But then there's also these books that I started thinking about, like, you know, I've said that this book, owes a lot to Mrs. Dalloway, it owes a lot to Sula in terms of thinking about a novel that's about two women whose most significant relationship is each other. And, you know, when I've worked with the book with a lot of different students, they're like, well, what does it mean that like they're not in a romantic relationship? So I was like, well, what if, you know, these two women whose most significant relationship in this way were in a romantic relationship? And then also Zami then sort of came naturally, thinking about Audre Lorde, who tells the story of her life through her relationships with various people, various women, some of these relationships don't last very long, which I thought was which I always thought was kind of interesting. And then the other thing I'll say is that I really do think that watching a lot of The Good Wife also sort of like, I think The Good Wife really like penetrated my consciousness. It also sort of became a part of the stew that all of this came out of.
I definitely was thinking about Shirlene MacRae, the first lady of New York, when I was reading this book, who not only was this like Black lesbian feminist poet, but she was a part of the original Combahee River Collective.
You know, I definitely read and forgot about that, but that is wild, right?
She's
and so, photos. Yeah. Yeah, no, so it was just so, but also I think the thing that was really interesting to me about this is that there was no narrative about, and then this, you know what I mean? Like, then this happened, was like, yeah, she was just this Black lesbian feminist poet radical, and now she's married to Bill de Blasio. Like, and so I was kind of thinking about like, well, what's the, you know, what all is happening there? And that's kind of an interesting puzzle for me.
One of the really impressive things about the book is the way that there's, you know, like Mrs. Dalloway, there's a, like the frame is this one day, but obviously you kind of accordion time in and out, and there's these sections that are obviously not there, go back decades. But I'm interested in, I'm just really interested in how you approach, I very quickly get very sort of processy. I'll try not to, for everybody who is not as big of a nerd.
They all want to hear exactly about process. That's what they're here for.
Okay. Well, I'm interested. Don't egg me on, because I'll believe it's true. I'm interested in just like just the same way that we hear the story of First Lady of New York, and there's this big gap, right? Which is like, oh, she did some speech writing, she did some stuff. Oh, now she's married to Bill de Blasio. How there's this moment that these two women, as you say, Lizelle and Selena, it was what, 20 years ago almost?
Yeah.
And just how you think about that on the page, like how do I bridge that gap? It's been 20 years, save for like some maybe CVS run-in kind of things.
Yeah.
How do I bridge that gap and still make it seem like this is important?
Well, you know, so what's kind of interesting about that is that that's not really about the way life works, but it's about the way memory works. And so I feel like what happens often is, so let's say it's 2021. 2021 is the year I finally processed 1996. You know, like, and it keeps sort of moving forward. But I think that like at different times, different phases from your life suddenly have a different kind of meaning or suddenly become important in another way. And you're sort of like engaged in them and sort of working your way through them. Mm-hmm. And I think that, you know, in a lot of ways, like, you know, when people have stories about romance, one of the things that's kind of like in fiction and also in the fictions that people tell each other, it's like, well, you know, this person was my first love and then we broke up, but we were always meant to get back, you know, and that can change whether it's a Wednesday or a Thursday, your feelings about. And so I think that like a lot of times it's not that necessarily like the significance of the thing as it happened, but the significance that we assign it later in memory, right? When we make sense of our own memory. And so I think that's one of the things that I was thinking about. And another thing that I was thinking about, or another thing that I do when I write, and it really, you know, I always want to do this because the thing I resist is like writing the boring parts of a book. So what I always want to do is just like write the parts that are interesting. And then the editor comes along and says like, okay, you know what, like this not, you know, this can't just be like impressionistic sketches that we just like tie together. So then I do fill in. But one of the ways that I could like really write a book like this that jumps around in time is really by focusing on the moments that felt like, okay, these are the moments that are actually creating this person. There are a lot of other moments in here we could use, but these are the moments that are creating this person, you know? And incidentally, those were the moments that I was interested in as well.
And there does not seem to be something kind of important about where they are. Selena's a little bit younger, but they're both like, you know, approaching middle age. And so they're thinking about like, how did I get here? And is this where I'm supposed to be? You, in your, just what you've read, you really picked an excerpt that showcases your humor really well, which is something that I think if people have read you before, just know that that's just what you do. You're just really funny. But I'm interested in like the relationship between sort of like humor and earnestness. And earnestness is something that like explicitly Lizelle spends time thinking about, like in the book, and just how you can write something that's very funny, but also is taking everybody very seriously, and what kind of considerations you make when you do that.
Yeah, so I mean, my mentor, Elizabeth Kraken, who I think is on the call.
I love this, also my former teacher.
Told us that, you know, the humor in your work makes the sad part sadder, and the sadness in your work makes the funny parts funnier, and that those are the ways that, like, it's the range of emotion that produces the emotional response. And I mean, I think in this book, humor works in a lot of different ways. You know, one way it works is that, particularly, like, there's a lot of banter between Lizelle and Wynne. And I think one of the things that really draws them together is a kind of shared sense of humor, but it's also a way to like sort of like volley something around without it ever landing, right? Like that's the whole thing, is that like when she thinks about earnestness, she's saying that, like, you know, when it first started out, it was all kind of this lark and they were just kind of running around. And then, you know, when they got married, you know, he starts calling her honey. And it's just like the idea of it, I think part of what she's like annoyed about is this idea that she's just in this, like, you know, really conventional heteronormative, you know, situation. But I think that, so there's humor, right? And there's a lot, like, and obviously, like, that's one of my favorite things. And a lot of the characters are funny and all that kind of thing. But I think what she's gotten into is a little bit of glibness as a way of like keeping a lot of the world at bay, which is like a slightly different thing, right? Mm-hmm. But in terms of like writing a book, like I feel like, or writing books, I mean, I just feel like humor is probably one of the top two things you could do if you're going to write and make people read it. You know, like, I mean, obviously there's definitely, you know, worth in other kinds of experiences people could have. But I feel like if you can swing trying to make people laugh, then I think that's like one of the, you know, best gifts you can like give anybody who's going to read your books.
What's the other top two?
I don't know. Like I say, you know, just like, you know, giving people insight about life, although a lot of times that's delivered by humor, right? You know, not always, but a lot of times it is.
Yeah, I think that there's a way that humor can, obviously there's a way that humor can kind of elucidate all of these things about especially like a big network of people, which is one of the things that's really exciting about this novel, is that there are so many people at this dinner, and they've all very quickly kind of set them up, and they've got their quirks and they have their quips, and then you kind of unleash them to just be weird among each other in this several hours of this dinner party, which is really amazing. And sort of what arises out of that, and also just out of the memories, and particularly Lizelle's way of seeing the world, is that in some ways this feels like a comedy of errors, but also kind of a comedy of manners, right? Like there's commentary, not just on the class that she sort of found herself in, which I think that class is sort of more upper crusty class, is often the one that, you know, when we talk about a comedy of manners, but there's also commentary on the class that she's sort of come from. The line, you know, my money is tied up in this house right now. I just like burst out laughing when I read it, because it's like, oh yes, I have been on, like, I don't even have a house, but I've used a similar excuse before on the phone, and I have been on the receiving end of that excuse before on the phone.
Yeah. No, I mean, I really think that it's funny because, like, I guess, you know, obviously the comedy of manners comes from, you know, I think like sort of 18th, 19th century Victorian fiction that's about a certain class, and it's about people whom famously were really invested in certain kinds of behavioral conventions. However, definitely, you know, the working class people I have met are also super invested in certain kinds of behavioral conventions, right? There are things you do, there are things you don't do. I mean, it's funny, in my class, and my literature class I'm teaching, we were reading Heavy by Cassie Lehman, the memoir. And there's this one part, and I was like, I can't even go into this for a whole class. But basically she says like, Key, these people here don't use washcloths. Like, it's just like that, like, I was like, I don't know if I can go into this today, but like in the piece of movie, like, yeah. So like, there are definitely like every sort of tribe, every group has its ideas of propriety and its ideas of manners, and so it's not that, only sort of like upper class people have those. It's just we've spent a lot of time thinking about them, but people have them.
Absolutely. That Mr. Charles is another one.
Yeah.
If you're calling him Charles instead of Mr. Charles,
yeah.
that means something.
But it's funny. That's funny you say that. I never even thought about that. He came into my mind as Mr. Charles and was always Mr. Charles, and I never even thought of him as Charles. Right. But also at this point, like Lazelle's a full adult. Right.
Yeah.
Like Mr. Charles. Yeah.
And now, yeah, then it can sort of morph into kind of like a facetious Mr. Charles.
Right. Yeah.
I am curious. I like to do this when I am in talks with people, just to ask them about their desert island books, because I just am keeping a running list for, who knows what might happen. So I'm interested in a book that you would take with you if you found yourself stranded on a desert island.
I mean, so this list changes a lot. Anything I go to, people ask me about a book, I'll say Maud Martha. Maud Martha is like my all-time favorite book. And when I was talking about, vignette, like the only interest, like that's where I got the idea from. Like that book is, because it's a coming of age story, but it's, when you think about coming of age stories, a lot of times there are particular scenes that pop up in conventional coming of age narratives, like first kiss, and in coming of age stories that are about, from certain eras that are about Black characters, like first time a white person called you, but Maud Martha is so particular in what it decides makes up the character and what makes up her consciousness, and so it's like, it's so kind of idiosyncratic in this beautiful way. But so that, I probably, if I had to go to a desert island, I would definitely grab that. The other thing I would really want is the collected poems of Lucille Clifton. Right.
Oh, absolutely.
Which is almost like I like you're writing this down. You're like, okay, I have to put this in my doomsday preppers container. Lucille Clifton's my all-time favorite poet, and there's just so many, I don't know. I mean, there's just so much there like that could really get you through like a lot of weeks in your, while you're foraging or whatever.
Those are two really good ones. I have not read Maud Martha in maybe.
Oh gosh, yeah, you should.
I have in maybe 15 years. Going to read again. It's very interesting. Very interesting list. So another thing kind of related to just observations about class and thinking about humor. Another thing that I found myself really impressed with in this novel is just the way that you manage unease, the feeling of it. And I'm interested in when you write a book like this, do you kind of have a, I don't know, like a vibe? Are you like, is the vibe unease? And I'm going to write this throughout, and that's going to be one of the ways that the tension sort of like carries us along, or does that kind of just bubble up?
I mean, I think that is like, in a sense, like, I mean, I don't have a brand, but if I had a brand, it would be that, right? Like, so, I mean, if you recall that I, up until now, basically I wrote about 7th grade, like that, that's the thing, like one of the things that's kind of most interesting to me. And like, just in terms of like pop culture and TV and like, what, that is something that I'm always really interested in, is unease. And I think that that's because I feel like a lot of times, like, attempts to make things okay are menacing. Like, or make things that are actually not okay and not comfortable seem totally fine. I find kind of menacing. And so my interest as a writer is to like go to these moments where things are really awkward and uncomfortable and like really dwell in those moments, you know, because they feel real to me and they feel like, you know, like something that like a place to really dwell a little bit more. Because in real life, there's so much of like trying to get past to like, oh, but it was fine. Oh, but everything was great, you know. And clearly that hasn't led us anywhere good.
That's one of the things that a party, and sort of using the party as a scaffold for the thing allows, is for moments that are just like, excuse my language, fucked up, right? To like live, and then you have to kind of figure out, especially if you're hosting the party, how do I like keep sort of this thing going? And one of the impressive things in this novel is the moments where Lizelle decides like, okay, I'm going to do it, and the moments where she's like, I'm just not going to do it. One final question, and then I think I will let people ask questions, and I'm assuming that more people are going to write questions as I ask this question. I'm hoping that people will put them in the chat. So one of so there's the sections that are like focusing on Lizelle for people who have not read the novel, and then there are these sections that also focus on Selena, Octave, the girlfriend from college. And the Selena sections, I'm interested in just when they came. One, just like, did you always know you would have Selena sections? They seem like something that felt that they needed to exist as you kept writing. And then I have another question after that.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, pretty much, yes. So I thought, I basically conceived of the characters at the same time. And I mean, I think in earlier drafts, actually, it was much more equally weighted between the two of them. And then Jenna Johnson, my editor, sort of suggested that that there would be a little bit more coherence if it was sort of more focused on Lizelle and the Selena sections were kind of secondary. I mean, I think that part of what the book is about is their complementarity and also a kind of contrast between two different ways of approaching feeling marginalized and vulnerable in the world, right? So one is like somebody who really doesn't have a lot of armor, and the other one is somebody who's built their entire life as armor, right? And thinking about so looking at the two of them. And, you know, I also like the kind of like slightly Rashomon sort of like way of getting a sense of like what their relationship was, you know, like there's that moment where in Selena's section, we find out that like sometimes she used to like fake orgasm just to get to the cuddling, which is so like a funny thing that like Lizelle would certainly never think of, you know, kind of embarrassing, right? But so that's the kind of thing that you can get from looking in the two different perspectives. And, you know, I think that there's like there are a lot of parts. So Selena certainly is like very melancholy, and her parts are very melancholy, but there's a lot of stuff in that I actually find kind of amusing. Like she has a kind of funny, a kind of more muted but sense of humor that I also thought was like a good compliment to not just Lizelle, but thinking about Wynn, you know, as a character.
Definitely. And she's even, you know, in circumstances that she doesn't necessarily want to be in, she's got like a particular way that she sees the world, that even in just her describing to herself the way that things are, it's like a kind of agency that she's holding on to.
Yeah.
So then my final question is, do you have any more books for us?
Yeah, I mean, I hope I do.
I meant to tell us about, I was not asking you.
Yeah.
Do you got more books after this book you're still on tour for? Do you have more books for us to read? I do hope that too, but I meant more books for us to take on a desert island.
Oh, more books on a desert island. Okay. Yes. So, I mean, I would take Sula on a desert island. I would take Cruddy by Linda Barry on a desert island. That is a fantastic novel. Really crazy.
Have not
really grim. Illustrated. That's like one of my all-time favorites. I would probably take Two Girls Fat and Thin by Mary Gateskill on a desert island. I've read that a bunch of times, and every time I read it, I'm still like, oh my goodness. I would take June Jordan's memoir Soldier on a desert island. I would take The Sellout by Paul Beatty probably on a desert island.
Wow.
So I think those are some of the books. Wait, what would you take?
Oh man, I would take Beloved, which I guess at this point is kind of Black girl basic, but it's also not wrong.
No. Every time you read it, it's totally different experience. And you're like, oh no, like every time.
I would also take I'd probably take Directed by Desire, June Jordan's collected poems.
Oh, yeah.
And I'd take These Changes also. And
yeah, of course.
I feel like I would take The Known World by Edward P. Johns.
Oh, yeah, that's actually a really good idea. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Your bag is bigger than mine, though. I never really did before. I'm like, I gotta pack light. I gotta just.
Well, Known World is really long. It's a heavy book.
It's true. That's another consideration.
Right.
Well, thank you for letting me talk to you. This has been great.
Thank you.
Going to see.
Yeah. So we have a question from Sabra. How did you decide on the title of the book?
So that's a funny story because this book forever was called American Dinner Party. And then, and it was a joke with me. It was a joke between me and myself about how dinner parties are overrepresented in American literature. And I was like, but I'm going to write one and it's going to have nothing to do with like a lot of ones like this. But basically my editor thought that it wasn't telling enough about the book. And I think that the Days of Afrekete sort of evokes the Audre Lorde book from which the character and the idea of Afrekete came for me. And like, the thing is, like, I wasn't totally sure, but like with the cover, it's kind of perfect and amazing, right? So I really like titles. So that's always kind of that's always fun for me and something I really like to think about.
And could you actually talk about the cover? Because it is really enigmatic.
I mean, the thing about it is like, I don't really, this is from a Lorna Simpson collage series. And it's, by the time it got to me, like, it was just basically, this is what it was. And, I said, yeah, that's amazing. So, I mean, I think the best things to say about the cover will probably come from people other than me who can sort of like look at it and make certain kinds of observations about, the art piece. But I mean, it's amazing. I love the way like there's these sort of double faces and I don't know. It works really well.
So I have a comment from Valentine. Valentine says, you touched briefly on the shifting perspectives between the two main characters. How did you decide where to place these shifts in the narrative?
So that was like a very painstaking process of like shifting around text and reading it through and reshifting it around and trying to figure out how to be consistent with certain kinds of facts. And, it turned into something that was kind of like, I think it probably feels organic, but it was like a lot of micro decisions about how things were working together. And I mean, I felt like it's a short book. And I wrote through the basic story of it in a relatively quick fashion, but it was like that part of it that really took up a lot of time, like to make all of these memories coherent in sequence and to decide who we were going to hear about when was like a sort of big part of how to get through it.
Nicole asks, can you speak more about writing the character Sochiel and the tension in her and Lizelle's relationship?
So, I mean, one of the things I was thinking about was so there's a distinction between race and class, right? I mean, so, there are definitely times when I think, obviously, like there's a lot of racism that being upper class cannot protect you from, but it's also true that as you move up in class, there are different kinds of dilemmas that present themselves. And I think for Lizelle, it's really about, if she has these people working for her, if she has these people, doing these things in her house that she doesn't want to do, if she has this young woman who is a PhD student and really only by virtue of her birth is like in her house helping her get ready, like, is Lizelle still a sympathetic character? Is she being like, ethical, responsible, and so I think that like, that's, and so, I have the sort of like, the Evertunus as a tiny plantation mistress, the like sort of riff on Du Bois, but thinking about the double consciousness as somebody who is Black, but who is also sort of like upper class and therefore feels herself maybe possibly morally compromised by some of the decisions she's making.
So Elisa comments, speaking of the title, can you tell us more on Selena's mom mishearing Afrekete as Africa eat?
Yeah. So that was like, a funny thing that happened in this book that I wasn't really even thinking about was how many times people mess up various names. And so like, I think the idea is that for Selena's mom, she wouldn't, a big part of her relationship with Selena is her complete lack of being able to perceive Selena and know what's going on with her, right? And so, and the idea that Lizelle is calling with like this code word that maybe she feels like the idea there is that her mom would have no idea what was happening there. And so I just think that was like another one of the sort of jokes about like mishearing, that's about like misnaming people or misunderstanding people or being unwilling to understand people, right?
Let's see, Jacob, forgive my pronunciation, says, I love this book and I'm so glad for the chance to hear you talk about it. Without soliciting too many spoilers, I am curious if there were any characters, minor or major, whose development surprised you throughout the process of writing the book.
So I think that I really became interested in a lot of the characters at the party. And I think that it wasn't even that necessarily their development necessarily surprised me so much as like that they just appeared, right? And so, one of them is the preacher, Chris, right? Who, I just think he's a great character and I just wanted to like hang out with him. And so like, that was one of the things that surprised me in the book. And I also, one of the things that totally surprised me and sort of became a plot development is the sort of like sudden drama involving Wynn's parents' friend Gladys, like she had been sort of superfluous in the story. And then like there's a sudden drama that erupts with her that kind of surprised me. But in general, a lot of it did. In general, what happened was, earlier this week when I was thinking about what I would read, there's a way that I was looking at it and it was almost as if somebody else had written the book. Because I was, I wonder what'll happen here. And I was like, wait, like, oh no, that's just, I wrote that. So I don't know how exactly that happens, but there were a lot of surprises, right?
And then Ratonya comments, full confession, my book just arrived. I love the cover, by the way. Asali, I just want to say thank you for providing this preview. I can't wait to get started.
Hi, Ratonya. And the book, I mean, it just came out yesterday, so it's not late.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna reactivate Angela a moment because we're gonna have to wind this down. But Angela, if you have any final comments.
Oh, my only comment, actually, I was contemplating leaving the room to get the book, but I did not, is that another collage from the same Lorna Simpson series is on Kathleen Collins's whatever happened.
Oh, it is. Yeah, whatever happened. Yeah. Interracial
No, Black Woman's Diary has one.
Yeah. Okay.
And what's really interesting about the two, I couldn't risk opening the door and my baby like seeing me, because then everybody would come back, is this one, the one there, it's like a woman kind of, she's got some kind of like maybe a tweed outfit. It kind of looks like a churchy outfit, and she's sitting on a chair, but she has a similar, because this whole series, you know, it's like everyone has this kind of like cumulus hair thing happening, and that would not be appropriate for this book at all. Like it's crazy. Yeah. It's from a similar series, but this one, because there's the duality, but also because it looks like she's either got like a secret or an attitude or both. It works really well in a way that one seems like it's about a woman who's like of a certain kind of milieu who also has a secret, but it's like a completely different like story that you would sort of read into it. That's what I have as my final comment.
I am just extremely grateful to Lorna Simpson for this, though, because it's really amazing, you know, and it fits so perfectly.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, on that note, we have run out of time. I want to thank both of you. This has been just delightful.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Bye-bye.
Good night. Thank you both. Thanks, everybody. Take care.